Hey everybody, in this video we're going to do a little bit of cleanup as we prepare before we start adding the functionality. So we have our assets inside of our scene now. You can download the example project and pull these same files if you like, or you can make your own, which is, I think you'll learn a lot doing that. But what I want to do is I want to start to organize this and clean this up. And I also want to set up my folder structure and my organization so that I can build out from it and keep all this tidy as I build. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a folder called examples. And the reason is because inside of my SoundSystem tool, I don't want to mix in all of my example stuff like my prototype sounds and testing script and all this other stuff. I don't want to mix that in with the core of the tool. I want to put that inside of an examples folder. Another thing to think about is if you're giving this tool to someone else, you may want a simple setup scene to show them how it works and to put examples so that they can see what your scripts are doing or how they can actually use your tool. You can actually do this with documentation, but I think it's helpful to see code examples and implementation stuff. So we're going to set it up that way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create my examples folder here. I'm going to drag my prototype music and prototype sounds in there, and we'll make the sounds later, but I want to actually get the functionality of the music player working before we move into sounds. Scripts, I'm actually going to move that into examples as well, and I'm going to relabel this example scripts just to be a little bit redundant, but I want to be able to look at this folder and say, okay, these scripts are just example code that shows how it works, but it's not core to the tool. And I want to isolate that and make that really clear. Everything else, I want to be core to the tool. So my classes, actually these test objects right here, I'm going to move these into the examples as well. If I add future code like the music player, the sound player and all that stuff, I want to have this separate from the example. So again, I'm also going to move my scene into examples because really they can use this tool in any scene they want. So now that I have this cleaned up, another thing I want to mention is the concept of a namespace. Now, if I open up the script, you're going to see that everything is just out in the open. Nothing is wrapped inside of a protective folder or anything. One thing you're going to see a lot is this namespace. We'll call our tool what it is, SoundSystem. And what this does is this wraps this all inside of this larger group right here. And the reason why we want to do this is because if we were to just have this floating out here and someone else imported our tool and forgot about it, and then they tried to create something called a MusicEvent, forgetting that this was a thing in our tool, we would have a clash. Like it wouldn't know which MusicEvent because MusicEvent already exists. And we're defining this stuff here. We really want to isolate this out so that if someone wants to use our system, they need to declare it at the top and say, I want to use the sound system. And so that's kind of what Unity does in a lot of their pre-existing systems. So like Unity Engine.audio, they're putting a lot of the access for their audio stuff like Audio Mixer Group inside of here so that if we want to access it, we have to be very explicit. We have to say using Unity Engine.audio, or, we could put that here too. We could say Unity Engine.audio. But that's really hard to read and whatnot. So a lot of people will just wrap their code inside of a sound system, and then people will generally put using at the top. And that way we know we want to use the Unity Engine.audio stuff. Then we have to put that there and we can access it easily. Now the other thing this does, it helps us define barriers between our systems. So for example, our sound system, if we were to make another system like a inventory or whatever, and we had some built-in dependencies between our sound system and our inventory system, we wouldn't necessarily want that because we want each of our tools to exist independently. Like I want to be able to use the sound system, but I don't want to use the inventory system. Then we want to define these boundaries so that we can, stick to them, and we want to be notified if we're breaking it. And here's the other thing. So we have our namespace sound system. All of our code is inside of here. If we go back to our example script, we're probably going to get an error now if we're actually using it, which it looks like we're not since it's blank. But if I try to do this and I try to say serialized field, I want to receive a music event song A or something. It's not going to let us. It doesn't recognize the keyword music event, which, the reason is because we haven't said that we want to use SoundSystem, our namespace. Now we could do this. We could put SoundSystem.musicEvent, and that would let us use it that way. But, that's a lot of typing, and it's code clutter, and it's going to get in the way. Best practice is if I want to use a particular system and we've organized it right, then at the very top, I'm going to type in using SoundSystem and keep it like that. So now we're declaring when we want to use a system. If you're used to working with Unity's UI, you'll have to do the same thing. UnityEngine.ui is a common one. TextMesh Pro, you'll have to put that at the top. A lot of these self-contained systems, you do want to isolate and contain. So now that we have this, it's important to remember that if we create another script or class that is key to making the sound system work, that we do want to wrap that inside the sound system. But our scripts that will actually use the sound system, they don't really need to be contained inside the sound system. They just need to access it, right? So if I actually want to use the tool, I have to open up access for sound system, but I don't really need to wrap this inside of SoundSystem unless I want it to be part of that grouping, which I don't. I just want to read it. I don't really want to make changes to it. So hopefully that makes sense. This is just some simple tidying up. The other thing that I still need to do is I need to set up a few example songs that we can use for testing our play functionality. Up to now, we have imported our sounds and our music. I hope you've done this, but we actually want to pre-configure a few assets to use this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create my asset inside of these songs so I can keep my layers grouped with the music event asset. And I made these over here. We could move these in, and it's fine. We'll just rename them. Sometimes it'll hiccup a little bit. So muse_test. If you want a different prefix, you could, but you'd have to change it in the music event. I'm just going to call this song 01 just to be, consistent. In a real world scenario, you'd probably call this like forest track or boss battle or whatever. But let's make another one. Music event. Call this one song 2. Just keep things real simple and generic. We'll delete our and really I'm just pre-configuring a few assets with the music event that we created in a previous video. And we'll do this one, song 3. And each of these are testing new things. This one, let's say music layers. I'm actually going to use 3 of these layers just to show you that you can mix and match it. And we're just setting this up. Again, no functionality yet. We're just, we're slotting in all the values how they should be, and then we can test and see if we hear it and it works as intended. So percussion, we'll do the background synth, and we'll do a melody. We also need to make our mixer, and I do want to keep this additive. Remember, we can do additive or just it'll fade in one self-contained layer, or this one will actually stack them as the additive version. So we'll make another song right here. We'll make this one. We'll do, what? I think with this one, let's not do percussion. Let's actually do synth to begin. Then we'll do melody. Then we'll do the drive. Like this is where it just kicks up into high gear. And this is where the percussion and things are being used. We'll keep this one additive too, so that we can test the crossfade between 2 different songs. So we'll fade the layers up, and then we'll just blend into a new song and retain our current layer value. You may see me bending down in the camera to feed the dog treats to keep her quiet while I record. And then the last one is our single layer blending, so that we can test for that. Remember, each of these tracks are independent. I did add a little license info thing here. This is just used for educational purposes. I own these tracks, but I'm using these for a game, and don't use this in your own stuff. Just use it for testing this thing, and if you want to listen to it, you want to keep it, that's cool. Just don't put it in your own projects and release it for money or whatever. This last one, music layers, we'll stick with 3. I think that's a good number. Rule of threes. We'll start off with ambient. We'll do growth. I think it's the second one. And then full, keep that single. And you'll notice that I haven't added a mixer, so let's do that too. Let's do an example mixer. And we don't want the mixer to be inherent to the tool, right? We just want to keep it down to its basic minimum blocks to create new stuff. But an example, let's make an example mixer. Let's right click, create. It'll be called audio mixer. And this is kind of a grouping for multiple smaller mixers. The wording on it is kind of tricky to me, but basically I'm just going to call this, as an example, example game. And then inside of this, you're going to see that it'll give you a few defaults. There's a separate window that we can actually view this, so I'm going to open that up. And window, audio mixer. And we'll drag that over here so we can see it. I wanted to show an example of how we can separate the music into its own little mixer that we can control. And we also want to separate the sound into a separate one, because in a lot of games, you want to be able to manually control the music volume compared to the sound. But a lot of times you may also want to let the player control that as well. So we're just going to use this to test to make sure the functionality is there. So I'm going to make a new grouping that I can put sounds into to control. And I'm going to hit the little plus button here. You see master is going to, handle the grouping between all the sounds in our game. But I'm going to make a new one, and I'm going to call this one music. And because I think I'm going to need this later on, I'm going to make an additional one. Remember, I'm just going to select master just to group this properly. Hit plus, and we'll call this one sound effects. We want to be able to label our music in this mixer group and then put our sounds in this mixer group and not have to worry about it. Like, we don't want the programmers to worry about it. We want to set that up inside of our example assets. So we'll do that. So then we'll come back into our assets. And now that we have our mixers created, we're going to open up our prototype music. And we have our 3 music assets that we created. I'm just going to slot in the mixer for music that we just created. So we'll take this, we'll say music, put it in there, do the same thing to song 2, put that in there. Same thing to song 3, put that in there. Let me double check the layer type, single, additive, additive. All right, so at this point we've done our tidying and we have our assets set up. We have our our sound imported, we've created our mixers, we've essentially configured the scriptable objects to however they need to be so that we can start adding the behavior. So, that's about it. Now that I'm all pre-configured and clean, I think we're ready to start building the music player, and we can start using that to add behavior and get our tool working.